Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And I noticed I might have started a second or two early, and there's a error message on one of my streams there, I'm afraid. Let me check that. Sorry for the delay. I'm sorry it didn't go away. I've got a little technical issue I'm going to have to work on behind the scenes, so excuse me a minute. on the screen. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday morning. It's December the 4th of 2023. Everybody's getting in the mood for the holidays. It seems like for some reason this holiday is going to be bigger than I'm used to. We went out and got some lights to put on the house. Maybe we'll do it today. It's a fairly decent looking day today, so get outside and do something. Anyway, how are you? Polly, good to see you there, and Nadia. And I know there's some folks watching on Rumble, but I am going to go ahead and not look at the chat this morning because I want to get into the reading of next part of our book, The Paperclip Conspiracy and the Hunt for the Nazi Scientists. And this particular part, I have subtitled it Looking for Ambros. And we know who that is, Otto Ambros. And so I'm going to open the book to page 88, where we left off. And while I don't expect to read the whole book, I am enjoying these portions that I've been reading. This is the fifth part, and you can watch all the previous ones on my archives at McDuff, or also I'm on Rumble and also on BitChute and Odyssey. And glad to see you if you also Facebook. So and thank you for joining our Facebook channel, and thank you all for joining our main channel now, which is Rumble McDuff Lives. And while we have 530 people have joined, I still need about another 500 to get over 1,000. And at that point, perhaps let go of YouTube. Welcome if you're on YouTube. I have not been on YouTube the past few shows because the content is too hot for YouTube. YouTube does not like to be challenged with difficult concepts. They like to keep it simple. So we did not want to play into the hands of the simpletons that run the AI over at YouTube. So we have to leave. We have to get a new home, and so far the answer has been Rumble channel. McDuff Lives, all one word, is the way to get the live shows. There is a McDuff Lives 2 words, which is kind of a umbrella channel that gets that plus the other channel I've created there called McDuff Archive, where we have a number of our book readings from the past and other shows that you might find of interest. Those are all Rumble channels, and they're all under the umbrella of McDuff Lives. I hope that makes sense. Pardon me a second. All righty. It's a book by Tom Bauer, published 1987. A British writer and an important resource for those that want to look beyond Annie Jacobson's Operation Paperclip to this one, The Paperclip Conspiracy. Chapter 5, The Hunt. When the 1st U.S. Infantry swept toward dense woodland outside Brunswick in North Germany in early April 1945, the front-line detachments feared desperate and vengeful SS soldiers were concealed in the undergrowth. But to their surprise, there was neither shooting nor any sign of the enemy. Instead, slowly driving up the forest road toward the small village of Falkenrode, they discovered, cunningly camouflaged under 1,000 acres of thickly planted trees, a large complex of low stone buildings. Zigzagging through the area, smashing down the doors, the soldiers found workshops, laboratories, parts of airplanes, engines, and huge earth-covered mounds. which they were later told were wind tunnels powered by electricity cables buried deep underground. As they swung their rifles, glass tubes splintered, microscopes crashed, and bundles of files scattered on the floor. Although the area was deserted, the unit soon discovered that it had arrived at the Hermann Goering Aeronautical Research Institute, the most sophisticated and advanced of its kind in the world. News of the find quickly reached G2, U.S. Army intelligence, and the CAFT teams behind the front lines. Yet, when the first intelligence officers arrived, none could quite understand what they had unearthed. Reference back to G2 confirmed that no Allied expert had ever heard of an aeronautical research institute at Falkenrode, and it was not marked as a target on any SIOS list. SIOS is the joint British-American group that wanted to find the German scientists and weapons. CIOS. Unknown to the Allies, the Institute had been established in 1935 and was operational at the outbreak of the war. Its anonymity was damning confirmation of the failure of Allied scientific intelligence and the inherent weaknesses of the Allies' own research. In early May, Colonel Donald Putt, an eager test pilot who had campaigned in the mid-1930s for the U.S. Air Force to adopt flying fortresses, arrived to inspect Falkenrode. Putt, who was leading Operation Lusty, an Air Force search and plunder mission, was amazed. Walking through the complex, he realized that he was in the midst of probably the most magnificent and lavish research facility ever constructed. The sheer abundance and extravagance of the instruments, subsidiary tools, and testing equipment were awe-inspiring. In the aerodynamics section, there were low-speed, subsonic, supersonic, and transonic wind tunnels. The engine section was equipped with a camera that could take 1,000 pictures a second to study the growth of a flame, and that could simulate altitude conditions up to 50,000 feet. The armament section had two firing tunnels, 400 meters long, built to study the effect of a 500 mile per hour crosswinds on missiles in flight. Among the first German scientists Putt met was Adolf Busemann, the inventor of the swept wing, who had been responsible for the supersonic wind tunnels and the rocket test station in Trauen. Busemann told Putt that throughout the war he and his fellow scientists had been granted every demand, regardless of expense, and that there was a similar institute in nearby Göttingen. I'm going to stop and make one of my comments here. This is when I hit a speed bump and I say, I've got to record this thought because I want to make sure that I don't forget it later. When we think of people like this having an unlimited budget within the moderate-sized nation of Germany that was already stressing its population to the fullest extent, and using slave labor as well, that this science project is more important than the people of the country of Germany. And what is behind something that's so important that the people have to starve in order that they can build, these 500-mile-an-hour wind tunnels to test missiles? And I just that foreign financing This is foreign financing. It's got to be. And when we look into the background of our, business community and how it has internationalized itself and, swapping boards of directors for IG Farben and Standard Oil, you know where I'm going with this, that this whole concealment of this amazing uh, technical institute, this uh, Goebbels Aeronautical Research Institute, the concealment was so effective. It's like somebody was standing there saying, "These are not the droids you're looking for." Koto just spoke up. All right, you understand what I'm saying. Days later, Theodore von Karman, a U.S. Air Force scientific advisor, arrived to interrogate Falkenroda's directors. He was too astonished by such overwhelming evidence of German superiority. Or he too was astonished. But Buseman told von Karman that he had given lectures about swept-wing jets as early as 1935, and that Falkenroda's wind tunnels were not the only ones. In a hillside in Koschel, a picturesque Bavarian village 35 miles south of Munich, was another wind tunnel complex. Von Karman's colleague, Dr. Fritz Zwicky, of the California Institute of Technology, had already arrived at Koschel and reported that the Germans were, quote, many years ahead of all other countries, unquote. Dr. Rudolf Hermann, Koschel's director, had obligingly dug up his reports hidden 2 months earlier and, with his colleague, Dr. Hermann Kurzweg, proudly presented their impressive experiments on supersonic flight. Zwicky showed surprisingly little interest in the rumors that both Germans and had been long-serving members of the SS, were ardent Nazis, and had held daily party rallies for their research team. Of much greater interest to him was the news that American troops had found a range of high-altitude test beds at Oberwiesenfeld, where German engines were run at full speed in, quote, normal flying conditions, unquote, a huge advance on the cumbersome Allied practice of fixing the engines to flying planes. The three Americans began discussing how to make best use of the German expertise and soon agreed that the most sensible solution was for the Germans to be transported across the Atlantic. Put wrote at once to General Wolfe at, and this is one of our favorite research places from our, Team W and the Screaming Ospreys, Wright Field in Ohio, and to Major General Hugh Knerr, that's Knerr, Deputy Commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Force in Europe, reporting that he had discovered 5 German scientists, quote, who would be of immense value in our jet engine and airplane development program, unquote, advancing the American program by at least 2 years. Wolfe and Knerr, Put suggested, should lobby for permission for the 5 to be evacuated to Wright Field. After 5 years of unceasing anti-German propaganda, and with the newspapers full of the newly publicized horrors of the concentration camps, it would not be an easy task. Nevertheless, Knerr, or Knerr, Knerr, who had already received several similar requests, reported to General Tui Spatz, and that's Spatz, commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Force in Europe, quote, occupation of German scientific and industrial establishments has revealed the fact that we have been alarmingly backward in many fields of research. If we do not take the opportunity to seize the apparatus and the brains that developed it and put the combination back to work properly, we will remain several years behind while we attempt to cover a field already exploited, unquote. In common with many Allied scientific experts, Knurr presented an uncompromising demand. Quote, the Germans should be treated as fellow scientists, not as Nazis. They should be well paid and allowed to travel with their families, and the critics who argued that the Germans were enemies should be told that, quote, pride and face saving have no place in national insurance, unquote. Well, that sounds like a load of something, doesn't it? Oh, wow. Oh, man. Yeah. Pardon me. Green tea. Trying to switch to green tea after the first 3 or 4 cups of coffee. We'll see how it goes. Chewy spots or spots, I guess in German, but I think it's probably spats. I don't know how he says it. I should look it up. Apologize there, General. Anyway, he was the commander of the Strategic Air Force in Europe. Spots passed Knurr's request to Washington, where the military was already distancing itself from the euphoria gripping the public. Now the priority was to defeat Japan. But there was also the longer term, and the Air Force in particular urgently needed to plan for the future. Early in 1945, General Hap Arnold, the commander of the U.S. Army Air Force, had asked von Karman, his scientific advisor, to provide him with the, quote, scientific ammunition, unquote, to launch a congressional campaign for adequate funds for post-war research. The mood then at the Pentagon was openly self-critical, and there was no attempt to hide the unpleasant truth that while British and German research had forged ahead, in America, quote, research and development of new weapons for the period 1939 to 45, unquote, had been unsatisfactory. Other countries' success, wrote Arnold, had arisen out of, quote, a different national psychology, unquote, towards research. I'll say. It was therefore imperative that the necessary steps be taken to permeate the entire AAF structure with a wholehearted conviction and acceptance of the necessity for understanding the scientific way of doing things. Recently converted to the strength of von Karman's case, Arnold urged the Secretary of War that in the future the Air Force, not private industry, should control the nation's research program. In the next war, air power would be the first strike weapon. America, the first target. Quote, the United States must therefore be the world's first power in military aviation, unquote. There was no sense of boisterous bravado in Arnold's message. It was an earnest plea for support following the annihilation of a group of B-17s on the very eve of Germany's surrender. Diving at 700 miles per hour out of the sun, 6 Messerschmitt 262s had attacked an unsuspecting raiding party of flying fortresses traversing Germany toward Berlin. Within minutes, 14 B-17s had been destroyed, the victims of Germany's R-4/M missile. Each German jet was armed with 60 of these missiles, which had first and devastatingly been used against American bombers over Schweinfurt in October 1943. 18 months later, Allied aircraft still possessed no equivalent. For the Germans, the brief moment of glory was sparse comfort in the dying battle, but for Hap Arnold, the incident was a telling indictment of his Air Force's technical inferiority. Throughout the war, neither Britain nor America had understood the importance of aircraft guns. As a result, aircraft armament did not figure on the investigators' priority lists. Both air forces had spent a great deal of time overcoming problems in this field that had been with them since World War I. Mechanisms froze at high altitudes, so antifreeze lubricants were needed. Blocked cartridge belts meant renewed research to produce a power-driven belt, and research was also needed into the absorption of recoil. The design secret of the fast-shooting German guns, electrical firing of the cartridges, was rejected by experts in England and America alike as unreliable. Gun design, even for aircraft, was the monopoly of the Army, and the Army remained obdurately unimpressed by a Luftwaffe invention. As the war ended, the German aircraft gun design teams at Mauser and Rheinmetall, I'm sorry, I can't quite see it, Rheinmetall Borsig, and the designers of the R&M aircraft rocket prepared to offer their services to a Sios man. Unable to appreciate the advanced technology, the Americans spurned the approach. 5 years later, at the beginning of the Korean War, the same Germans were quickly recruited and spirited to the United States. But by then, other members of their team had equipped the Russian MiG fighters with the world's best aircraft guns. Now, there is a possible McDuff event, okay? The Americans spirited these Germans, the designers of the electrical firing cartridge gun, and their colleagues had already given that same technology to the Russians. It's, the layers are getting peeled back here. There's a lot more to World War II than meets the eye. Arnold's ambition for a scientific air force was still a proposal pending political approval when, in May, Eisenhower's staff at SHAEF headquarters in Paris asked the U.S. War Department why its request for a definitive policy regarding the exploitation of German science and research remained unanswered. Germany was already under Allied control, and the plethora of competing intelligence missions needed to be coordinated and monitored. Officially, SHAEF's policy was to close all German research stations and arrest their personnel, who were to be released only after exhaustive interrogation. Some Allied investigators found that policy inflexible and self-defeating. It was vital, they felt, to keep the laboratories open in order to obtain information. And releasing the scientists might mean losing them forever. The crude remedy was imprisonment. Internment camps, codenamed Dustbin, Ashcan, and Back Porch, for war criminals, important Nazis, and a few scientists had been established successfully in Paris, Bad Kissingen, and lastly, Kranzberg Castle near Frankfurt. Germans named on arrest lists were incarcerated to await the waves of military investigators, representing every interest who passed through the camps, often asking the scientists the same questions and receiving the same answers. Arresting important Germans seemed the only possible course, but the absence of any policy allowed individual officers carte blanche to exploit national and sectarian secrets. The last frantic weeks during the eclipse of the Third Reich gave the Allies a breathtaking opportunity to grab German secrets. Intelligence that a few weeks earlier would have been priceless poured into Allied headquarters. Reports from more than 200 American secret agents from the OSS who had infiltrated into Germany, from resistance groups, frontline units, and intercepts, and from sightings by reconnaissance aircraft produced a detailed, if not always accurate, picture of the Nazi plans to conceal whole government archives, laboratories, patents, prototypes, and underground factories. Sympathetic railway workers, hotel staff, and telephone operators supplied Allied agents with an endless list of sightings. At Mühldorf, east of Munich, there were 10,000 men at work day and night building repair shops above and below ground. Heinkel blueprints had been hidden, quote, in a tunnel entrance 30 meters from highway on east side of mountain at Fügen in the Zillertal. At Eitach, there was a subterranean Messerschmitt factory. That's Eichach. And there was another at Straubing Prison. Flash messages reported sudden intensive security measures around villages and remote areas where monasteries and mansions had been requisitioned by, quote, unknown government agencies, unquote, or for weapons factories. It was a golden harvest for the technical intelligence teams traveling close behind the front line. By far, the earliest and most staggering discovery of the first intelligence teams to arrive in Germany was that the scientists at IG Farben had secretly developed a new strain of lethal nerve gases, against which Allied troops had no protection. The discovery of the invincible weapon, which had it been loaded on a V2, could have destroyed the population of London with ease, was not made public until years after the war. First, to avoid alerting the Russians, and second, because American investigators were concluding a series of secret deals with the IG Farben scientists. Pardon me. The revolutionary nerve gas, tabun, that's Tabun, had been invented in 1936 by Dr. Gerhard Schrader, or Schrader, Schrader. Even a minute quantity of tabun could kill within 20 minutes, and its derivative, sarin, could kill 5 times more effectively. Commissioned by the Wehrmacht, Otto Ambros, a brilliant chemist and senior director of IG Farben, had in 1940 secretly built a factory at Dierenforth in Breslau, Silesia, for mass production of the two lethal gases. Tests on animals and painful experiments on concentration camp inmates confirmed the new chemical's fatal efficacy. The first critical discussion about its use probably took place in Berlin following the Wehrmacht's defeat at Stalingrad in 1943. Ambros was summoned by Hitler and asked whether sufficient tabun was available for use against the advancing Russian army. Production, said Ambros, was increasing, but he suspected that the Allies also possessed tabun, since international technical journals had discussed the compounds before the war. Moreover, the Allies could together produce more gas than Germany alone, and he feared that IG's only deception, code naming its gases Trilon, the name of a common detergent, had been unsuccessful. Until his death, Hitler, who harbored a marked aversion to gas warfare, apparently shared Ambros's delusion. In fact, although Allied intelligence was aware of the name, throughout the war it never discovered its true significance. In 1941, an MI-10 assessment had confidently asserted, quote, "It appears that the Germans have no new gas of surprising effect." For the next 2 years, the possibility that the Germans might launch a chemical or biological attack on the Allies surfaced occasionally for discussion, only to be dismissed. Allied intelligence assumed that the Germans possessed only the type of mustard gas used in World War I, which had proven unreliable when used over large areas. Although Churchill was not totally averse to the notion of gas warfare as a last resort, Britain's resources were so depleted that upon the outbreak of war, the country lacked sufficient phosgene to initiate an attack. In contrast, the U.S. Chemical Warfare Service was public, expansionist, and sufficiently powerful to openly lobby Congress to prevent the ratification of the Geneva Protocol banning gas warfare. Between 1940 and 1942, American expenditures on chemical rearmament zoomed from $2 million to $1 billion a year. The first suspicion of Ambros's development emerged in 1943 from an intercept about the issue of new gas masks in Wehrmacht units and from a German POW who, under interrogation, gave a precise description of a new odorless and colorless gas that possessed, quote, astounding properties, unquote. But the alarm soon sounded. Lack of more concrete evidence but the alarm soon subsided, beg your pardon. Lack of more concrete evidence reassured Allied intelligence that there was little likelihood of a chemical attack, though fears persisted that Hitler might, in a moment of despair, order a suicidal Holocaust. As a precaution, chemical warfare teams were attached to frontline units invading Germany. Allied fears were not groundless. In January 1945, on Hitler's orders, stores of tabun were hastily evacuated from Silesia and later loaded onto barges on the Elbe and Danube in preparation for launching a final attack from the Bavarian last redoubt. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tarr, the intelligence chief of the Chemical Warfare Service, led the hunt for the stores and the plant where the gas was produced. Traveling with 50 other experts, Tarr joltingly drove across France in armored weapons carriers, passing through bomb-damaged towns and villages, creeping over Bailey bridges, and avoiding a never-ending torrent of humanity before finally crossing the Rhine at the end of March, hours before the last German defenders fell, surrendered, or disappeared. While the battle was still raging, despite complaints from the 12th Army headquarters that, quote, investigators are currently proving a nuisance to the armies, pressing too hard on the heels of the combat soldiers, unquote, Tarr's team broke into the IG Farben factories in the Ruhr and farther south. Finding the factory in Ludwigshafen heavily damaged, Tarr and Edmund Tilley, an Air Force interrogator whose fluent German and investigatory skills were to prove invaluable over the next months, ordered cowed German technicians and industrialists to lead the American soldiers to the homes and hiding places of their colleagues. Those who showed reluctance were summarily locked up. Within a day, Gerhard Schroeder, the inventor of the new gases, had been located, promptly opened his safe, and willingly confided the secret tabun and sarin formulae to the Americans. Momentarily, Tarr and Tilley were ecstatic until Schroeder volunteered that the IG Farben production factory at Dierenforth had been captured intact by the Red Army. It was some comfort when Schroeder added that he believed a counterattack had later destroyed most of the plant. In fact, the Russians had not only captured the Dierenforth factory intact, they had also found the laboratory's notebooks and documents hidden in a mine shaft at Rudesdorf. With the threat of a German attack receding, the first priority for Tarr and the Chemical Warfare Service was now to counter the Russians' new advantage. By the end of April, when Tarr's top-secret reports had been circulated in Washington and London, several other intelligence agencies were looking for Ambros and the other IG Farben directors. Colonel Bernard Bernstein, A Treasury official from Washington was given the assignment of destroying IG's iron grip on European industry. Bernstein set himself the task of interrogating the industrialists, exposing their camouflaged stranglehold over their European and American competitors, and tracing IG's enormous wartime plunder. Another group of American officers, war crimes investigators seeking evidence for the proposed international trial of Nazi leaders at Nuremberg, wanted to extract from the IG's directors information and confessions about their pre-war financing of Hitler's regime and their intimate complicity in his subsequent crimes. Ambros could answer all of their questions since he had, with Himmler's help, masterminded the construction of I.G. Farben's factory at Auschwitz, where tens of thousands of concentration camp inmates were literally worked to death by I.G. Those exhausted by the work were callously diverted by the terse jerk of a thumb to the gas chambers. But Tarr showed less interest in Ambros's genocidal career than in his scientific expertise. Soon after the German surrender, Ambros was located at Gendorf in Bavaria, but it took 2 weeks for the information to percolate down to Tarr. In the meantime, Tarr had tirelessly interrogated other gas warfare experts. From them, it rapidly emerged that with Ambros's connivance, the new gases had been tested on human beings with fatal consequences. Inmates from the Natzweiler concentration camp had been used by Dr. Karl Wimmer, a Luftwaffe doctor, and Professor August Hirt from Strasbourg University to test the effects and possible antidotes. After excruciating deaths, the human guinea pigs were dissected and pathologically examined. Eyewitnesses told the Allied investigators that Hirt and Wimmer had, over the open cadavers, gleefully congratulated themselves on their pioneering work, which was in turn praised by the Health Directorate of the German Air Force. Accordingly, when Tarr finally met Ambros, I.G. Farben's complicity in the human experiments was beyond doubt. The atmosphere at their introduction resembled countless other first encounters between Allied experts and similarly qualified German scientists. The war was over, and the Germans' past attitude toward the Nazis was irrelevant to the extraction of their often unique knowledge. Like many other Americans, Tarr had no interest in Ambros other than the scientific. By all accounts, Ambros was responding enthusiastically and was beginning to form a binding relationship with his interrogator when, in July, an edict from Schaeff headquarters ordered Ambros's arrest and transfer to the dustbin internment camp for intensive interrogation. By this time, Colonel Bernstein had compiled a chilling indictment of the IG director's intricate involvement at the highest level in the planning and management of the war. And the war crimes investigators had uncovered incontrovertible documentary evidence of the IG director's complicity with the SS in enslaving and gassing millions of innocent victims. Most of the directors of the IG board were already being held at dustbin when Tarr set off with Ambros from Bavaria to Kronsberg, then suddenly diverted to Heidelberg, ostensibly for 48 hours questioning. While Ambros remained in Heidelberg, Tarr frantically flew between Frankfurt, Paris, and London, at first trying to negotiate, then demanding the release into his custody of all the German chemical warfare experts from dustbin. The reason remained obscure, but at every level his request was denied. Finally, amid accusations that Tarr was forging release orders, Ambros suddenly disappeared. Days later, he reappeared at Villa Kohlhoff in his home in Ludwigshafen, by then in the French zone. It eventually became apparent that French investigators had followed Tarr's team to the IG factory and in the prevailing chaos, scooped up more than 500 major reports and arrested the technicians, including Karl Wurster, a senior IG director and known war criminal. Since the German surrender, the French had adamantly protected, quote, their Germans from the American and British investigators. Among those demanding secret access was Major P.M. Wilson, a British officer responsible for tracking down German scientists. In August, when Wilson eventually arrived in Ludwigshafen with an arrest team, he found Ambros installed as head of the IG Farben factory by the French military government. It just gets weirder and weirder, doesn't it? I mean, so, so America comes over there and saves France again from the evil Germans, but the French are going to protect the Germans. Pardon me. Serious stuff. Wilson reported at once to London, quote, the friendly treatment being given to this man who is suspected of war criminality, unquote. Cheekily, Ambros even wrote to the British that he was, quote, regretfully unable to meet in Heidelberg because I have to attend important meetings with high-ranking French gentlemen, unquote. Oh my God, this is like the drug dealer in the French Connection at the end when he's riding away on the train and he just goes, bye-bye, got away. By then, he had been named for questioning by the Allied prosecutors at Nuremberg, but the French ignored their requests. Quote, this man is thought to be far too dangerous and undesirable to be left at liberty, protested Wilson, but Tarr refused to reveal the circumstances of Ambros's escape. And Wilson suspected that he had, quote, taken steps to assist him to evade arrest, unquote. Tarr's denial of French bribery seemed to Wilson unconvincing, but he never considered the alternative, more probable scenario that in return for divulging their secrets to the Chemical Warfare Service, Tarr may have guaranteed the Germans their freedom. It was another 18 months before Ambros was finally delivered to the American prosecutors, and Wimmer handed over the detailed pathology reports on his human guinea pigs. He was never prosecuted. Personal deals were not confined to either the Chemical Warfare Service or the Air Force. Similar understandings for different reasons were made in the north of Germany, where a race was underway to plunder the German Navy. Brian Irk, commanding a British T-force, had reached Hanover in mid-April to find the town enveloped in a thick alcoholic haze. Liberated slave workers had consumed the contents of the town's largest cellar. Traveling with Urquhart was an Anglo-American naval team under the command of Duncan Curtis and Ian Island from the Royal Navy's 30AU group. Remember 30AU is Ian Fleming, think Sean Connery and his speedboat. And an American naval captain, Albert Mumma, Mumma, later promoted to admiral. These three pioneers of technical intelligence were closing in on Kiel, Admiral Dörnitz's sanctum and the hub of the German naval inventions. En route, little had been found. Retreating German garrisons had methodically destroyed classified material, and liberated concentration camp inmates had ransacked vital laboratories and administrative offices both in anger and in search of loot. Only in Lübeck did the team find a taste of the riches to come, a prototype of a 50-knot hydrofoil, human torpedoes, and a unique two-man midget submarine. On May 5th, escorted by a small special air service detachment and soldiers from the 5th King's Regiment, Curtis, Muma, and Eileen reached their goal, the Voltaverke, where the revolutionary high-speed peroxide submarines and torpedoes had been developed and built. Despite intensive bombing, the factory was practically unscathed, and its production lines had halted only 2 days before. Two new peroxide-driven submarines, the U-1408 and the U-1410, lay shattered by the jetty. Quote, "They looked like gigantic fish rather than conventional submarines," unquote. So the unconventional giant fish-shaped submarines. Huh. Ringo Starr know anything about that? It's funny, isn't it? You know how little snatches of pop culture they tend to toss things at you, and you can't figure them out, and you can't figure them out. Well, who knows? But I think that the idea of they had a number of these big submarines and was able to, exfiltrate people and equipment that way makes sense to me. Anyway, I think I'll stop here. I'm starting to feel like I'm pressing my voice perhaps a little too far. And so we will leave off here at page 98, where we've been talking about high-speed peroxide submarines, two-man midget submarines, human torpedoes, and submarines that look like gigantic fish. Tomorrow I'll be happy to rejoin our good friend Harley Schlanger, and we'll bring us up to date on his great work and all of the folks over at LaRouche and the Schiller Institute. Hope you can join me then at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And let me reach over here and let the Ospreys sing us hello and goodbye.